Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Commander's 2 Cents. On episodes like these, I give you my own personal take on topics about the format in general and current news. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio, and today's episode is going to be about the most underrated X spells in Commander. Well, at least the most underrated X spells in my opinion in Commander. So you're not going to see any cards on here like Torment of Hailfire, which sees a ton of play and is a great finisher and is decently expensive for a budget player, but you're not going to see spells like that. You're going to see some lesser played cards that I think really have a lot of utility, not in every single deck, but in the decks that need them, can really use them, and they can be a lot of fun and very effective. So let's jump into it with the first one, and that's going to be Biomass Mutation. So, Biomass Mutation is an instant that costs X Simic. It says creatures you control have base power and toughness XX until end of turn. So this is kind of like it's a combat trick, essentially. You know, you're basically turning your entire army into XXs until end of turn. Now, it doesn't give trample, so, I mean, it is kind of like an overrun type effect, but without the trample. So, if you're still putting that exact same amount in, you're basically getting, so if you put 5 mana in total, that's X equals 3, so your creatures become 3/3s. That's not really going to help too much. It does definitely help when you get to higher amounts for that X, though, and plus, this is at instant speed, so that's where it can really be crucial. So, you swing through with a token army, your opponent decides not to block quite a few of them because they're just tiny tokens, potentially. There may be some 1/1s in there. You cast this at instant speed, X equals, let's say, 8, which is very doable in Commander. Now you've got a ton of 8/8s hitting for a lot of damage. If they happen to block some of them that they thought they could get rid of easily, then you're going to take out their creatures as well. Maybe you've got something else that can give them trample. There's a lot of things that can make this card really good. And again, that instant speed, I think, is the crucial part. Because if you build up that wide army, you're able to just quickly and out of nowhere basically pump your entire army and make them huge. If you're playing a ++1 counters build, again, this actually works really well with that, because this one, you're changing the base power and toughness. So those ++1 counters stay on top. So if you've got a bunch of 1/1s that each have 3 counters on them, that's an extra 3 power and toughness on top of whatever you're paying for that X. So this can be really good. Again, you've got, your normal, finishers in green, like Overwhelming Stampede or Overrun. But basically, this is kind of another one that's in Simic that doesn't give you that trample, and you do have to generate a lot of mana to make it really effective, but that's really easy in green. So you can really make a lot of use out of this. It can come out of nowhere. People don't expect it, especially, instant speed combat tricks. They really don't see those coming in Commander, and this one can just be a great finisher for you if your deck can use it. So that's the first one. The next one I'm going to go over is Indomitable Creativity. It's a sorcery for X, red. It says destroy X target artifacts and or creatures. For each permanent destroyed this way, its controller reveals cards on the top of their library until an artifact or creature or card is revealed this way and exiles that card. Those players put the exiles cards onto the battlefield and shuffle their library. So this is kind of like a mass polymorph, but for not only your things, but your opponent's things as well. And it can hit artifacts and or creatures. So this one, I think, is pretty undervalued because of its flexibility. This can really help you out, obviously, if you build around this, which, maybe you've got a deck that focuses on, artifacts and not so much on creatures or making tokens. And basically, if you've got some big creature in there, like a Blightsteel Colossus, you might be able to hit that off the top. And basically, again, there are ways to manipulate your deck. There are ways to make sure that, you don't have too many creatures in your deck, except for the big finisher ones. So if you've got something like a Keep in play, you can make that token that you can then destroy, or you can destroy one of your artifacts. And it is kind of, there is a, kind of randomness to it on what you're going to hit off the top. You might hit an artifact, but again, the same thing can happen to your opponents too. So if your opponent has, one of their biggest threats on the board, just for 1 extra mana, into that X, you can take care of that creature and hope they hit something smaller off the top. They might hit a mana rock, then they might be set back because of that. Obviously, you're not going to use this on your opponent's tokens. If they've got a ton of small tokens, you're not going to try to really help them out in that way. But you could also use this as a political tool to maybe make a deal with another opponent. If there is, another one of your opponents is way ahead, you can try to help everyone out by trying to get some more threats onto the board to take that player out. Again, this is kind of like a mass flexible polymorph that can help you out, really help you out if you hit, if you hit the right things, but also if you build your deck in the right way with a lot of synergies to take advantage of this. You can get a ton of value out of that X if you're casting on your own things, and you can also use it on your opponent's things too, and usually you're going to hit something worse than what they already have out. There are times, where you could accidentally, get their Blightsteel Colossus out instead of, a Mana Rock, but it happens. So it's a very fun, flexible card. I think it should see more play. It's not for every deck, but it can definitely work really well in decks that can use it. Another one that deals with artifacts is going to be Dance of the Manse. Dance of the Manse is a sorcery that costs X, white, blue. It says return up to X target artifact and or non-aura enchantment cards each with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If X is 6 or more, those permanents are 4/4 creatures in addition to other types. So this is not only a mass reanimation spell for artifacts and enchantments, but this also can basically turn those artifacts and enchantments into threats. So this can work really well in any kind of an enchantress deck or an artifact-focused deck as well. It can be a card that can really get a ton of value for you and can also be a great finisher as well. So in an Enchantress deck, you might get something like, Eidolon Blossoms, which can really help out with this as well. If that's in your graveyard and you've got a lot of other enchantments in your graveyard, Eidolon Blossom says, whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So let's say that you reanimate 6, you've got X equals 6, so you're getting back 6 enchantments. That means they're all going to come into play. You're going to draw 6 cards off of this, and then you're also going to make them into 4/4s, making them a lot. They can be great finishers for you. Again, that's like 24 power at least. So basically, math. Basically, that can be a good way to go about it. Again, like an artifact-centric deck, like an eggs deck could really use this as well, because you can just keep sacrificing your eggs, getting them into your graveyard for you for value, and then getting them back with something like this and turning them into threats. So Skycloud Egg is one of those egg examples. Basically, something that can sacrifice for essentially free, draw you a card, and then you can get this back, with Dance of the Manse. So again, Dance of the Manse, a flexible card. It's a newer-ish card from Throne of Eldraine. I think there's a lot of potential for it, again, as a huge value reanimation spell, and then also just a potential finisher as well. Next up, we've got Saheeli's Directive. Saheeli's Directive is a sorcery with Improvise that costs X, red, red, red. So Improvise is, again, that each artifact that you have can tap basically for 1 for it into that X. Reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of artifact cards with converted mana costs X or less among them onto the battlefield, then put all the cards revealed this way that weren't put onto the battlefield into your graveyard. So this is essentially like a red Genesis Wave for artifacts, kind of. I mean, it's not... Genesis Wave obviously is going to be better because that can hit essentially any permanent. But it can also... Sorry, let's read Genesis Wave real quick for those of you who don't know. It's a sorcery for X, green, green, green. It says reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put any number of permanent cards with converted mana costs X or less among them onto the battlefield, then put all cards revealed this way that weren't put onto the battlefield into your graveyard. So this one, yes, is better because it can hit pretty much anything when it comes to permanents. Saheeli's Directive only hits artifacts, but it does have that Improvise to help you out, so you can utilize your artifacts that aren't even mana rocks to help you pay for this and to get more things off the top and into play. And for an artifact-centric red deck, this thing can be huge and get you a ton of value, can get you a ton of more things into play. It can just get a lot of artifacts off the top. Again, if you've just got, even some mirror tokens or whatnot in play, you can just tap all those and essentially use them as mana dorks to put more into this, to get a lot of things off the top, and to just really set yourself ahead. Again, not Genesis Wave, not quite that level, but it is a very valuable card that can really help out in a deck that's focused on artifacts. Again, if you've got something like a Quicksmith Genius in play, it says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So you're essentially not looting, you're rummaging. You rummage for every single one of those artifacts that are coming into play, so you get even more value out of that. There are a lot of things that care about artifacts coming into play, leaving play, so you can really work around that. And I think it's just it's a haymaker kind of card for the right deck, and it can really set you ahead. Another haymaker card that I've actually used in quite a few decks, I believe, and one that I think still is very underplayed, is going to be Rally the Ancestors. It's an instant for X, white, white. It says return each creature card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Exile those creatures at the beginning of your next end step. Exile Rally the Ancestors. So this one, is kind of like a mass reanimation spell for creatures, but with a couple of conditions. Essentially, you aren't going to be able to attack with those creatures unless you have a way to give them haste, because they're exiled at your upkeep. So even if you get them on your opponent's turn, it doesn't matter. Or if you get them on your turn, it doesn't matter. You need to find another way to give them haste if you want to attack with them. But the thing that can really come in handy with this is utilizing enter the battlefield and leave the battlefield triggers with this. Again, if you're doing an aristocrat style strategy and you've got something like Cruel Celebrant in your graveyard, it says whenever it or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, so you can drain out your opponents. If you've got that plus a sacrifice outlet with like a Viscera, which says sacrifice a creature, scry 1, you only need to put, 3 or 4 mana into that X, so 5 or 6 mana in total, and you can get, with those kinds of decks, pretty much all your creatures back from your graveyard right back into play. Yes, you're not going to be able to keep them around for long, but in aristocrat-style strategy decks, you really don't care about that. You're trying to sacrifice creatures for value, so you get all your creatures back. You maybe use them for blocking if you're doing this at instant speed on your opponent's turn, but you're also going to sacrifice them for an incredible amount of value, drain your opponents out with all these different kinds of effects. There are ways to get around losing those creatures. Again, you don't want to have them exiled. For the most part, decks that care about getting creatures back from your graveyard really don't want them exiled. So if you've got that sacrifice out, that gets around that. But then if you've got something like a Sundial of the Infinite, that can make this an even better card. It's an artifact that costs 2. It has to pay 1 and tap it to end the turn. Activates ability only during your turn. So you can essentially use this to get rid of that exiling, to get around that exiling, basically. Again, I'm not a judge, but I believe that works. You essentially getting your creatures back permanently then at that point. So this just becomes a mass reanimation spell at instant speed for cheap, and it can be very effective. Again, really effective in aristocrat-style decks as well as other kinds of decks. Another one that's somewhat similar that might be even better in certain circumstances is Wake the Dead. Wake the Dead is an instant that costs X black. It can only be cast during combat on an opponent's turn. It says return X target creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sacrifice those creatures at the beginning of the next end step. So this one is similar but different. Again, this does have the restriction that you can only cast during combat on an opponent's turn, which is fine. Again, it's a mass reanimation spell for cheap at instant speed still. And you can get, it doesn't limit based off of converted mana costs like Realm of the Ancestors does. You're just returning X target creature cards back to play, essentially. Again, in aristocrat-style decks, you want to be able to sacrifice things. You want to be able to get value out of them. Maybe you've got something like a Grey Merchant of Asphodel that comes back into play. Again, you're only paying 1 mana per creature, essentially. So Gary comes into play and drains all your opponents for a ton, and that's already enough value, essentially, just from reanimating that. Maybe you've got something like a Pitiless Plunderer that says whenever another creature you control dies, create a treasure. So essentially, this forces you to sacrifice, so you don't even need that sacrifice outlet to get those ETBs and LTBs out of this. You're essentially getting those creatures back, getting a ton of value out of them. Again, if you got back, let's say, 5 creatures, that essentially pays for itself with that Pitiless Plunderer, because you're going to be sacrificing those creatures and getting some treasures out of them. This can be a really, really effective card. Again, like Rally the Ancestors, but different. They both can be very effective in pretty much the same deck. Another card that is similar-ish, but can get you those creatures around for longer, is Immortal Servitude. It's a sorcery that costs X, Orzhov. It says return each creature card with converted mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this one is very specific not compared to the other ones, but again, it deals with converted mana cost, but at a specific converted mana cost. It's not less than or equal to, it's exactly this mana cost. So let's say that you've got a lot of creatures in your graveyard that have a converted mana cost of 2. This can get you all of them back. So it doesn't matter if you got 2 of them or if you got 20 of them. If you're milling yourself, if you're sacrificing creatures and getting them into your yard, you just pay that, 5 mana in total, and you can get back all those creatures that have converted mana cost of 2. Again, this one's more for specific decks that maybe are really low to the ground. Again, aristocrat-style decks can be very low to the ground and have a lot of creatures that have the exact same converted mana cost that are pretty low. So this can be a mass reanimation spell that you get to keep those creatures around for just 4 or 5 mana, depending on your deck, depending on how it plays. This is somewhat like an Eerie Ultimatum-ish. You can basically kind of pull it off depending on your deck again. Eerie Ultimatum says return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. Again, obviously this is just creature specific, but if your deck's built in the right way and you've got a lot of creatures that are at that 1 or 2 converted mana cost or whatnot, you can get a ton back at once. Rise of the Dark Realms is another finisher that's used. Obviously this gets you back. That gets you back creatures from other people's graveyards, and I'm not saying that this is anywhere near in comparison, but basically, it's another way to mass reanimate creatures, and I think that has a lot of value in Commander in the right decks, and I think it's being overlooked right now. So give that one a look. The last one that I'm going to go over today is going to be one of my favorite ways to finish players off with a green deck, and that's going to be Squall Line. Squall Line is an instant for X, green, and it's going to deal X damage to each creature with flying and each player. The flying really doesn't matter, although it can come in handy against certain decks. But basically, this is a way for a mono green deck to finish players off outside of combat, essentially, which you don't typically see in mono green decks. In mono green decks, you see, let's just keep attacking, let's keep smacking our opponents. We're going to cast that spell that pumps all of our creatures, and we're going to keep swinging. This can kind of come out of nowhere, and as long as you've got more health than your opponents, and you've got enough mana to do so, you can just finish players off at instant speed with a damage spell, essentially. This is kind of like an Earthquake, but in green. A more apt comparison actually might be Fault Line, which basically does the exact same thing, but it deals damage to creatures without flying and each player. So again, this is more of a red effect for the most part. Dealing damage directly to players isn't exactly what green does. Now, again, this does hit you, so keep that in mind. But green's got plenty of ways to gain life. You've got ways to stay ahead of your opponents in that aspect. Maybe you attack first, get everyone else down to lower than your life total, and then you cast this and you finish everyone off at once. And it's a very big, splashy card that, yes, can help you too early if you need to take out some flyers. But basically, it can be a great finisher and can come out of nowhere and can really surprise players, especially when they're not expecting against a mono green deck. So, and again, in green, you've got plenty of ways to ramp. So you've got a lot of ways to get more life than your opponents and a lot of ways to get enough mana into this to take everyone out. So it can be a lot of fun. Again, this is just a quick list. There's plenty of other really underrated X spells. Maybe I'll tackle those some days, but these are just some that I thought of, and I think that that really could see a lot more play in the right decks. Again, they're not for every deck. They're not going to be, that Torment of Hailfire that, you're like, okay, this is always a auto finisher kind of in a black deck for many players. But they're underrated in my opinion, and I think you should check them out. So, yeah, that's all I've got for today. So comment below with your thoughts. Are there any X spells that you think that I missed that you think are underrated? And yeah, that's it. So thanks again, and have a good one. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.